think we're recording. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay.
All right, hey guys, I'm Catherine Patton.
I'm Mallory Rice.
And we did the describing changes to the flow of energy in an ecosystem.
Okay, our standard is S4L1, and it says obtain, evaluate, and communicate information about the roles of organisms and the flow of energy within an ecosystem. And our substandard is D, and it says use printed and digital data to develop a model illustrating and describing changes to the flow of energy in an ecosystem when plants or animals become scarce, extinct, or overabundant. And we're focusing on just describing changes to the flow of energy in an ecosystem and not the model, developing a model.
For our essential question and I can statement, we're going to tell the students this at the beginning of our lesson. It is, I can interpret data to explain the causes and effects of scarcity and the overabundance of a population on the flow of energy in a food chain.
Okay, so to begin, our engage is going to take about 7 minutes, and we're going to start by having students watch How Wolves Saved Yellowstone. And while watching the video, students will be asked to listen out for things that happened while the wolves were not in the area, and they're only going to watch about the first 2 minutes of this because then it starts getting into the definitions and stuff, and we don't want them to hear those words yet.
In 1995, 14 wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park. From there, those 14 wolves basically saved the entire park's collapsing ecosystem. Let's talk about that. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an upload, and let's jump in. On March 1st, 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the National Park Protection Act into law, creating the first national park, Yellowstone. The goal of creating the national park was to preserve the natural landscape and wildlife for generations to come. The creation of Yellowstone protected most of the native species, but it didn't provide protection for most of the predators, like the wolves. As a result, by 1926, all the northern Rocky Mountain wolf packs had been hunted to extinction. Although reports of single wolf sightings continued, they weren't enough to hold the wolf's prey at bay. By the mid-20th century, the deer and elk populations increased substantially, resulting in overgrazing, particularly of the willows and other vegetation important to soil and riverbank structure, leading to heavy erosion. As a top predator, wolves were one of Yellowstone's linchpins, holding together the delicate balance between predator and prey. Their removal in the early 20th century disrupted food webs and set off something called a trophic cascade. The wolves' natural predators, in this case the elk, multiplied, all while consuming increasing amounts of foliage. This hurt the species that relied on that vegetation, like the birds who nested in the trees, and the beavers who used the willows to create their dams. And without the beaver dams, hundreds of native fish species started to decline. And as the fish declined, so did the animals that fed on them, like the foxes and bears. By removing a single species, a cascade of negative effects propagated outward throughout the ecosystem. In 1974, the gray wolf was officially recognized as endangered, and so recovery efforts were mandated under the Endangered Species Act. The very next year, the long process to restore wolves to Yellowstone began. But for a long time, problems were evident. The program lacked both the necessary funding and any meaningful willpower to get it done. Despite the fact that, legally, restoration was supposed to begin in 1975, Congress only got around to appropriating funding in 1991, only about 2 decades late, which, by today's standards, might actually be a fast pace. After receiving more than 160,000 public comments, the most of any federal proposal at the time, 31 gray wolves were drugged and abducted, or relocated as conservationists like to call it, from Canada to Yellowstone. When wolves were brought back to the park, they finally killed the
Okay, so that would be all that we would allow the students to watch. And then after viewing that video, each student will have the opportunity to write one thing that happened to Yellowstone on a sticky note and place it on the board. And then these sticky notes will be revisited during the explain portion of the lesson.
All right, so for the Explore section, this would take about 15 to 20 minutes. The students will use their Chromebooks and go to a website called Gizmos, and they'll follow along with a worksheet that we give them to see the effects that scarcity, extinction, and overabundance has on the ecosystem. And Gizmos basically just shows them like how populations affect each other and like how they grow, like with or without certain animals. The students will be able to work on this worksheet with their elbow neighbors to complete the worksheets. They can like share ideas and like what they learned with them. And then if the pair finishes early, they'll be able to share their findings with another pair of partners that has also finished.
Okay, so this is the worksheet that students will be using for the explore portion of our lesson. It just has the directions, and students will go through and fill out each of these blanks as they work along the simulation that we will be showing you in just a moment. But they'll just read these and do what it says, and they'll be able to see like the changes and stuff in the ecosystem as they go along. So now we're going to go look at the website. Sign in. And so here's the forest area, but I think it's better to look at the graph. So here, like I would show the current value so you can see how many of each animal is in here. So there's the mushrooms, the bears, and the trees, and then you can advance a few years and just see like how the population's not really changing. There's no outside factors affecting them. And so then here, I'm about to take some of the bears away. So they're kind of scarce right now. So you advance a few years, see how they come back to carrying capacity of the ecosystem, and then we can look and see how it affects the deer and see how like it grows and then it starts to shrink as the bears come back. And then here I'm taking away all the bears that they have gone extinct in this ecosystem, and I advance a few years just so like they can really have an impact on it, so you can look. And so you can go down and you see how like the population of the deer starts to we'll look at that in a minute. But the population of the deer will start to grow, and then as it continues and they run out of food, it starts to decline. And so we'll advance a few more years so we can see them like continue to die out because they're running out of things that they need to live. And we'll look at the trees in just a moment. So the trees are starting to die as well. You can see how they were growing very well, but then as the deer start to eat them, they are going down. And then the mushrooms are also dying off as well. And then here, the bears are being reintroduced into the ecosystem. So we're showing how at first they're way overabundant, so they die off quickly because there's not enough deer in the ecosystem to feed them. So the deer really do die off. And then as the bears go back to carrying capacity, so does the deer and the trees and everything else. So that is what they would be doing. And while students are working on this portion of the lesson, the teacher's walking around observing, looking at what they're doing, and also asking them questions to make sure that they're like thinking about what's happening. So she's going around asking what's happening to the bears right now, what's happening to the deer, what's happening to the trees, and and other things like, is this good or bad for the environment, and how are each of these things affecting the other populations in the ecosystem. So then for the explain part, we're going to allow about 15 minutes. And so once all the students have finished the simulation, they're going to come meet at the carpet in a circle. And so they are able to have like a whole group discussion and be able to look at everybody like when they're talking. So first, they're going to get their sticky note off the whiteboard so they can read like what they said was happening in Yellowstone. And they're going to compare that to what was happening in their simulation, and then make those connections about how these different key animals or populations in an ecosystem does affect the other populations. And then after that, the teacher will have a graphic organizer where she already has the definitions written on it, and she'll just have them covered up. So as they talk about each thing, she'll just take them off of the thing, and she'll say the definition, and then students will be able to discuss like when this was happening in the simulation, and she'll write that under there so students are able to make that connection. And then the teacher will also be guiding the discussion so that students notice a pattern in how the ecosystem returns to a set number of each population, and to extend the conversation by introducing the term carrying capacity. So this is the This is just a replica of what the graphic organizer would look like. So each of these things would be covered, and as they talk about each other, the teacher would just take off whatever is covering these, and she would introduce each definition and then write what was when this was happening in the simulation. And then over here, we would talk about patterns and things that were happening, and then introduce carrying capacity.
All right, and for the elaborate section, it'll take about 6 minutes. The teacher will show a different food chain that is a little closer to home for the students, like something they'll find in their backyard. The students will have time to look over it, and then one of the animals will be removed. The teacher will ask the students what has happened and how it affects the other living things in the ecosystem. So they'll be able to like write that down on a sticky note and switch with a partner. And then some of the students will then share with what their partner said to the class if they agree or disagree for that. And then this is a food chain that will show them. Then we're going to take away the bird and then give them a few minutes to figure out what's going to happen after the bird is taken away, and they'll be able to share with the partner and then with the class after that.
Okay, and then after they are able to elaborate, we will move on to evaluate, and we'll give them about 15 minutes to work on this assessment. And it's just talking about like the scarcity, extinction, and overabundance, and like how they viewed that. So the assessment will have students answer different questions pertaining to what was learned during the lesson, and also be able to connect these to how it affects the different ecosystems. And then for students to be moving towards mastery, they will have to make it or get 4 out of 6 questions correct on the assessment. So here's the assessment. So they'll start out by matching the definitions with each, like matching the term with the definition. And then they'll have to think about what, like back to the simulation about how that was affecting the ecosystem. And then they'll have some multiple choice. And then they will also have to think about like, what if another population was disturbed during that? And then we also made a bonus and talking about carrying capacity. And this doesn't really count towards anything. It was just to see like if the students grasp that or not, and if they like just as a bonus.
All right, so for the closure, this will take about 3 minutes. The teacher will ask the students to define scarcity, extinction, and overabundance again, and then share that with the class. They'll also turn and talk to a neighbor about different examples of each of the 3 words. And once they've talked with their neighbor, the teacher will tell the students how scarcity, extinction, and overabundance not only affects animals, but how it can also affect the students by changing what they eat and the environment around them.
Okay, so these are the materials and technology that we would use during our lesson. So of course we would have the forest and ecosystem worksheet that we would use during our explore portion. We would have the assessment that we would use during evaluate, and then they would need pencils, their Chromebooks for the explore, and then the flow chart that we would use for the explain portion, sorry.
All right, this is our differentiation. These are like the accommodations we made for certain students. So student 13 has limited mobility. Since she's in a wheelchair, there's a path for her to get to the carpet without any obstacles. So she'll move to the carpet first and sit in an area where she will be in the circle, and then the other students will come to the carpet and form a circle where she started it. Student 1 is gifted. This student will be asked to elaborate a little bit more on their assessment and be asked to write at least 2 sentences so that they're able to think about what they're learning like deeper. Student 6 has dyslexia. For the simulation, they're working in partners, so if she is having trouble reading, her partner can help her. And for the assessment, she'll be pulled to the back of the classroom to a small group so that the teacher is able to help her more one-on-one. Student 3 has ADHD, so the students are going to have the opportunity to get up and move around the room during instruction, so they will not be stuck in their desk the entire time, and it will allow her to move around a little bit during this. So English language learners, for the simulation, they're working in partners. Their partner will be able to help in the area they're having trouble, like decoding the words. For the assessment, they'll be brought to the back table so the teacher is able to help them with the words that they don't know. And if they speak more of their home language than they do English, the teacher will work on putting the assessment in their home language.
Okay, and so for the personal, cultural, and community assets of our students, we do want to make sure that we are incorporating things that are important to our students and that interest them, so they are interested in our lesson. So students 2 and 6 both like animals, and our lesson is mostly about animals and how they affect each other. So we want to make sure like we say, hey, look, we're learning about animals today. Like, I know you like animals and we want you to pay attention so you can learn more about them. and we will make this connection with them at the beginning of the lesson. Student 3 likes to go hiking and kayaking and be outside. So the teacher will point out that and say, like, when she goes hiking, this is a food chain that she will see. The one that we used in the elaborate portion is one that she would see, and we want to make sure we point that out. And then student 11 wants to be a computer programmer when she grows up. And so we want to make sure we're incorporating technology and ways for her to use the computer. So we incorporated the simulation so that she is able to be interested and work on things that she is interested in. And that is our lesson.